I was greeted in Canton, North Carolina by the sights and sounds of the Blue Ridge Southern Railway. All 5 of the company's 6 axles were front and center, with 4 of them online and sounding great. Blue Ridge Southern's 6 axles are pretty unique. Numbers 4201 through 4204 are SD40-2s on the inside, housed inside SD45 car bodies. I believe this technically classifies them as SD40M-2s, but the railroad simply calls them by their original model. The SD45 car bodies are quite attractive, but I'm still a sucker for the classic look. Number 4205 is personally my favorite, sporting a one-of-a-kind nose logo and the only true SD40 car body on the roster. I had hoped the engine was idling in preparation for some movement, but the pins on either side of the front wheel quickly curbed that idea. Both 4205 and 4203 were sitting on the maintenance track, out of the way of daily manifest number T31. The Blue Ridge Southern, reporting mark BLU, operates on the easternmost 47 miles of the Southern Railway's former Murphy branch. The line was completed in 1894 under the Western North Carolina Railway, stretching 115 miles from Asheville west to the line's namesake city. Just 5 years old and owned by Watco, the BLU has based their operations in Canton, with almost all trains being turn jobs to and from their Canton yard. Heading west from home base, the tracks meander their way through the namesake mountains towards Sylva and Dillsboro. The Great Smoky Mountains Railroad assumes ownership in Dillsboro, where the Tourist Railroad runs trains through the mountains for another 38 miles into the Nantahala Gorge. Heading east from Canton, the tracks drift down a 3% grade into the Hominy Valley near Candler, where they are gradually lifted back up into Enka. From Enka, the track remains relatively flat all the way to Murphy Junction. The aptly named junction is where the Murphy branch connects with Norfolk Southern and BLU's connection to the outside world. From Murphy Junction, it's a little less than a mile before the BLU reaches Norfolk Southern's Asheville Yard, where the short line and Class 1 make up to 2 daily interchanges. Continuing a long-standing tradition of amazing railroading on the Murphy branch, the Blue Ridge Southern hosts beautiful trackside views, grueling grades, and an all-around awesome environment to chase some trains. The beginning of this morning's chase was in Canton, where train T31 is preparing its eastbound train. In addition to the Blue Ridge Southern, Canton is also home to Evergreen Packaging. Evergreen, a paper manufacturer, has an absolutely massive facility in Canton that requires daily service from the BLU. By far the largest customer on the Blue Ridge Southern, Evergreen requires 1, sometimes 2 daily trains to Asheville and back to keep their production line rolling. Evergreen is a great customer for the Blue Ridge Southern. Boxcars full of paper are brought downhill to the NS in Asheville, and the return train comes back with vast quantities of loaded wood chip cars. These commodities routinely make up the majority of the traffic on 31, and today was no exception. "3 hours after I first arrived and 4205 was still idling. There was still a glimmer of hope in me as I held out hope that it would be added to T31's lineup, and sure enough, it was. Prior to our visit, 4205 had been in and out of the maintenance track, so I was thoroughly excited to see the engine on the point of T31. Apparently, the railroad only brings 4205 out when the extra power is needed, so I hoped this meant that the return trip of 31 would be coming back uphill from Asheville with quite a train. After 4205 had been added to the head end, the train slowly made its way towards the yard office. The crew detrained and took what I thought was a lunch break. I waited for another 90 minutes, and by 1:15 p.m. the train still hadn't moved. With that, I went for my lunch break. Coming back to the yard, it was discovered that the train had already departed, but the slow speed down the mountain made it easy to catch up to T31. On the way down to Asheville, the tracks cross over the Hominy Creek and through the Linden Cove neighborhood. This is probably my favorite spot along the downhill journey into Asheville, but just one of many beautifully scenic spots along the right-of-way. Lindsay Road is another such spot, and we were able to make the drive with just enough time. Exiting the rural landscape and entering Asheville suburbia, we saw the train squealing across Bruce Road in Enka. Just as I previously mentioned, most of T31's traffic is due to evergreen packaging back in Canton. The bulk of that is made up of wood chip hoppers, which I found really interesting. I've never really seen many chip cars, and their sheer size had me totally taken aback. We had hoped to beat 31 to Murphy Junction, but the notorious Asheville traffic proved that to be nothing but wishful thinking. T31 is closing in on Murphy Junction and will end up waiting for quite some time. NS is known for giving BLU a hard time when trying to exit the Murphy branch and enter their yard. Once arrived, the crew had about 90 minutes of switching to do in order to assemble their westbound train back to Canton. We had driven around the city for most of that time and came back to the yard to see the very last car roll by. Rush hour traffic was in full swing by this point, and T-31 outran us all the way back to the Hominy Valley. We evaded the traffic and sprinted down Old US 19, setting up to the amazing sound of heavy EMD power echoing throughout the valley. When those 4 EMDs came screaming by, we knew 4205 had been added to the lineup for good reason. 4 different cuts of wood chip hoppers, lots of assorted boxcars, and even a couple shorty tank cars put the westbound T-31 at 54 cars in total. I was absolutely floored. The icing on the cake for me was the amount of wood chip cars, something I still had not been normalized to. All chip cars are destined for Evergreen, coming from loadouts in Hampton, Tennessee, and Bridgewater, North Carolina, both via Norfolk Southern trains 123 and 135. T-31 would need every bit of a running start as it began the ascent out of the Hominy Valley and up the grade towards Canton. In fact, even while the train passes me at Morgan Cove Road, there is a distinct drop in speed as the locomotives presumably hit the beginning of the climb. 31 was preparing to engage in an intense game of tug-of-war with gravity as the grade into Canton only gets steeper, peaking just shy of a whopping 3%. We were winding our way through the mountains, excited about the next spot I had picked out. Holder Branch Road put us right in the thick of it as T-31 underwent the long and arduous climb back to Canton. The raw power that was about to be unleashed left me speechless as the 4 SD-40-2s claw their way up the mountain. The Blue Ridge Southern was quickly becoming one of my favorite places to railfan. The absolute fury of 12,000 EMD horses clinging to the rails was a sight to behold. After watching the entire train at Holder Branch Road, I had assumed we wouldn't be able to get back ahead of it until the yard in Canton. But just as we passed the engines at High Bridge, the snap decision was made to pull off once more just outside the yard limits. The heavy 54-car train had all 4 engines on their hands and knees as the ascent continued into the golden hour and by me at Star Ridge Road. On the other side of the Canton yard, we had been blocked by T-31. It appeared as if the crew was doubling in the train, shoving cuts of cars into different yard tracks one at a time. This gave us one final opportunity to hear the beastly EMDs in action. West of the yard limits, the engines are staring head-on at one of the steepest grades on this side of the Mississippi River. The 6 axles don't venture west of Canton, but I would love to hear them try. This was a great end to our chase of T-31, definitely one of my all-time favorites. Thanks for railfanning with me today, and make sure to tune in for part 2 on the Blue Ridge Southern.